Cover that equals food. That's the theme of this week's video, and it's a management philosophy that Eric has preached to me from the day that I've met him. And in this week's video, we're going to look at an old field environment and how cover equals food for all wildlife species.
Mossy Oak Properties, where outdoorsmen find their favorite place.
When it comes to wildlife, there are two species that I can't live without, and that's turkeys and grouse. But for sure, one habitat type, one ecosystem that I absolutely love, can't live without, because it's so much fun and offers so much, and that is an old field environment.
And in this video, we're going to go over old field management. We're going to evaluate an old field on Eric's piece of property and the life and the diversity that he's created with not a whole lot of work, just some intentional management decisions, a little bit of herbicide, mainly fire, Eric's favorite management tool. And we're going to look at all the life that was created from the work that you've done. We're standing in an old field environment right now on Eric's piece of property, and as long as I've known Eric, he's preached one pretty simple management philosophy, and that is creating habitat in which cover equals food, or food that equals cover. And I don't think there's a better example of that than an old field environment which we're standing in right now.
Yeah, old field environments have to be hands down one of my favorite things to manage because of what they offer for wildlife, and it's very easy to manage, which is always a plus, right?
Yeah.
It's always a plus. You can kind of just do a little bit of fire, do some chemical, and then all's good for the day. But they offer so much, especially like we're standing in about a 6-7 acre field of old field. And within the old field, which is really cool, Cody, right? It's just like there's all these different type of ecosystems.
That's the thing with an old field environment that I think is really cool, and I know it's why it's so productive for wildlife, is because it's so diverse. We talk about diversity. The more diverse your property is, the more attractive it's going to be for wildlife. But as you mentioned, like we're in a 7 acre field, a 7 acre old field environment, but within that 7 acres, we can micromanage it and really create multiple ecosystems within the old field environment. But we're standing in the middle of it now, and there's native warm season grasses, Indian grass, tick seed, goldenrod, pokeweed, beggar's lice. Each of those old field environment forbs and grasses offer something of value to wildlife. We talked about cover that equals food, and that generally we think of that and we apply it to whitetails, but cover that equals food applies to all wildlife species.
Yeah. Hands down, rabbits, you know, I mean, just the non-game community, birds, snails, snakes, you know, list goes on, what this does. And what's really unique about the management of the field, if you have the opportunity to do a controlled burn, because some states you can't do that, but let's say you can, let the field tell you what it wants to be. Right. Like what we're standing in on this little section, there's a lot more warm season grass, such as, you know, Indian grass, and there's segments of goldenrod. I would love to have this whole field looking like this, but I really don't want that to be that way as well. But it's a very unique spot where you can really see your feet. If you're a turkey poult growing, you know, in a latter part of the spring, early part of summer, you can really maneuver. The ground nesting birds, they had that umbrella type, you know, system going on for them of protection plus food with insects, all that stuff, that protein that those birds need. But when you do an old field type of management, one thing that you really want to do, you just let's just say hypothetically you can't burn, you burned it off, and then you just walked away and just assumed that all was good. No, look at the progression throughout the summer after you burn. You see all the vegetation, what it kind of, again, it's letting you know what it wants to be. Right. And then, you know, late summer, or excuse me, early summer, midsummer, now we're in late summer going into fall. The fields have really changed. But here's the best thing about an old field environment. It just keeps on giving. Right. That's really cool about an old field environment, that it changes throughout the year and offers something different of value to wildlife throughout the year. As you mentioned, as we get from late summer and transition into fall, there's less of a food component. It still has food value for wildlife, but it becomes more of a cover component for especially deer. You'll see deer in old field environments all the time. Think CRP. CRP can be an old field environment. So it's a progression, and as it grows and changes throughout the year, it's changing as wildlife are utilizing it. Yeah, and one thing too, this plant right here, this is called goldenrod. This plant here is, people just, they hear goldenrod, you know, it's 16% protein, roughly. And all a deer needs to reach its, excuse me, optimum potential is around 16%. And when it's growing, it's pretty desired, excuse me, browse species. Not high, but you know, deer do browse the heck out of it. And it has the water intake that wildlife needs. Rabbits really love goldenrod, other wildlife species as well. But again, as this plant matures this time of year, this September, it turns really woody. But the plant is not done giving because of this. I mean, I just did that. Did you see all the pollen come off of it? Yeah, for your honeybees. Honeybees, and I'll let Cody explain this a little bit better than I can, is that honeybees, you know, there's not much going on. They're going into their fall, the winter type living. And you know, they need that pollen, they need that nectar.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about goldenrod. As we get into late summer, a lot of the pollinator species are past peak production, but pollinators still got to make a living. And as you mentioned, goldenrod, as we get into summer and to fall, it kind of loses its value to whitetails, but that doesn't mean it's an invaluable plant species to wildlife. And it's perhaps most beneficial to the bee community this time of year because of the pollen that it produces. The bees will take that pollen, take it back to the hive to feed the babies to help increase and build populations throughout the winter. So again, cover that equals food, not just for deer, but for all wildlife.
So, as we just said, and we're going to probably say a couple times more, is that a old field just continues to keep giving, and having diverse environments within a really cool environment such as an old field, it brings in so much diversity, so much life. And what we were standing in, well, this might be great through the spring and you know, most of summer. Now, is it really good for the rest of the winter time that's going to be coming? So we're going to go to a different section right now that's totally different than the section that we're standing in and what it can offer. So let's go take a walk. Now, this section that we're going to be walking to, it doesn't have as much warm season grass, has a little bit more goldenrod community, okay? And once you get in here, you can't see your feet as much. You still can, but not as much as the, you know, with the bunch grass and stuff that the Indian grass and big blue can offer. But again, it's diversity, and the more diverse a piece of property is, the more it'll be attractant. So goldenrod, good for rabbits, you know, for this cover. This is, you know, this is thermal cover for a lot of different species throughout the winter time, but a whole different environment in here. But one thing that you have to keep an eye on in an old field environment, it can be acceptable to invasives. Now, I look around and there's really one invasive here that is a pain in the butt, and that it just showed up, and it's called deer tongue. Some people call it Tioga deer tongue, but just deer tongue. This right here, it's that. You know, it's that.
It's one of those problem plant species. It's ironic because it is native, but it's an example of how a native plant species can be aggressive and create a monoculture. You mentioned spicebush was a problem before you did the management on this and controlled burned it. Spicebush is a beneficial shrub for pollinators. Grouse feed on the berries, but anytime even native plant species can be aggressive and create monocultures, and deer tongue is an example of that.
Yeah, it can really take over, and that's something. And what's nice about like a grass species like this is that it's very easy to kill. You just have to be diligent, and doing a controlled burn and then letting it start to green up, you see the bare soil. You can do a lot of spot spraying, like Cody does a lot of spraying. You can go in there with I mean, it's very easy. It's just time consumptive, that's all, only the big thing. But again, different type of community within a big community, and that should be your goal with an old field environment. But lastly, let's step over here. We have the section, we did a little sample section of pollinators within the old field environment, and it was just a big hit, a great success on adding diversity. So what do? Go big or go home. You look at an aerial map of this old field, and it's going to be the most mosaic type thing. So what we're going to do in this open area, we just took a dozer and we just kind of cleared it out. We're just going to be planting a pollinator mix within this old field environment. So we have an environment that's a little bit of bunch grass, goldenrod, beneficial weeds. We have a section over here to my right that's mostly goldenrod with very little bunch grass, and then within the center of it we're going to have a pollinator spot that's just, I cannot wait to see what this ends up being like. The amount of life that we can accomplish by just managing within, micromanaging our environments, thinking outside the box. And I'm always, Cody and I preach this, is always having fun along the way and constantly learning. I know we were walking out here, we're like, wait, what's this plant? Got the old iPhone out, clicked on it. I mean, we're learning as we go as well, because you don't know everything. But yeah, it's just going to be very exciting. And to talk about this pollinator spot, what we'll do is we'll come in here and spray it. We're going to do a winter planting of all things. We're going to spray this, we're going to prep the soil, and then I want to wait till the soil temperature gets below about 50 degrees, and then I'll either broadcast it, roll it in, or I'll just a no-till drill and drill it in. But the soil temperature has to be below around 50, so that way we don't get a warm spell and it starts to germinate. We get that hard winter and it'll really screw things up. So you want to get that soil temperature low before you do anything when it comes to a fall seeding. But it's going to, that seed's going to be able to stratify, all that stuff. It's going to be boom, it's going to be really great.
That's the cool thing, I think, about old field, and you kind of touched on each of the elements about an old field environment, is as they change throughout the year, it's fun to watch the progression of the plant communities in an old field change throughout the year, and it's fun to watch how wildlife respond to the plant communities as they change throughout the year. But also as managers, we can, it's a habitat type that we can always be involved in and have our hands, get our hands dirty with. I mean, from a controlled burn and disking during the winter, we can spot spray invasives during the spring and summer, and then we can prep next year's extension of this old field with the pollinator planting during the winter. So there's management work that we can do really all year long to add value and to further benefit it for wildlife.
And take note, as you drive around, no matter what state you live in, this type of habitat is really shrinking because everybody loves to get on their tractor, hook up the brush hog, and do a little tractor therapy. And that's one of the things that it's really hurting the old field environment ecosystems out there, is just mowing. Just start off with a little section to get a taste of what you can have on your piece of property, or instead of destroying it to plant a food plot. Again, this creates life from whitetail deer all the way up to snakes. It's something you should really look into. As you can see, there's a lot that you can do with an old field and accomplish many things with an old field. That's
right. An old field environment, if I had to summarize it in one sentence, as we mentioned in the beginning and throughout the video, it is cover that equals food, it is a wildlife paradise, and it is diversity. And as we have said from day one, and we will continue to say in perpetuity, the more diverse your property is, the more attractive it's going to be for wildlife. And I don't know of a habitat type that accomplishes that better than an old field environment.
Yep. Once you accomplish creating an old field environment, get that done first.
Yeah.
And then, as you can see what we talked about and showed you, once you have that environment rocking, then you could really go in there and micromanage. But first things first, get an old field established. Right. And that is usually maybe taking a food plot, let it, maybe disking, or just a field, and just let it disc, kill the grasses. And guess what? A lot of that seed is already in the soil. There's no need to buy ragweed, goldenrod, all this stuff. It's already in the soil. It will be created. But again, once you get that established, then the fun really begins.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe an old field environment as well. They're so much fun. I mean, once you can get them established, the management to create and maintain an old field environment is burning, disking on a tractor, a little tractor therapy, a little spot spraying with herbicides. Who doesn't like killing invasives? And then obviously watching wildlife respond to the native plant communities in an old field environment is so much fun. We looked at goldenrod, tick seed, native warm season grasses like Indian grass, and how all wildlife, not just whitetail deer, can respond and benefit from the plant communities in an old field environment is what wildlife management is all about.
Yeah, and just like many wildlife species that's throughout the country that is, you know, on a decline, this ecosystem, this environment is strictly, it's following the same path. So anytime that you get the opportunity to let a little area go, talk to the farmer that you're hunting on, or you have that piece of property that you're just mowing, and it's just, why am I mowing this? Think about having an old field environment on your farm, on your property, and it's just hands down. You will see life.
Mossy Oak Properties, where outdoorsmen find their favorite place.